Good evening, I'm Britt Clennett in Hong Kong and welcome to ViuTV News. Coming up on tonight's show. The US signs a record-breaking arms deal with Saudi Arabia as President Trump begins his first overseas trip since taking office. 6 weeks ahead of Carrie Lam's inauguration, she reveals difficulties in finding people willing to join her cabinet. And Britain's royal sister-in-law gets married in a celebrity-studded affair. Well, with less than 2 months to go before taking office, Chief Executive-elect Carrie Lam has yet to form a full cabinet. Lam says she faced difficulties in the process of recruitment. Not everyone is keen to serve in the government. There is a lot of candidates to consider before committing to office, she says. But the incoming leader is optimistic about her progress and expressed confidence to form a pragmatic team. Meanwhile, Lam said her husband Lam Siu-po will not serve in any public organisations because he wants to keep a low profile. Meanwhile, pro-establishment DAB party called on the new leader to budget more for teachers and subsidising kindergarten tuitions. This comes after Carrie Lam promised an increase to recurrent education spending by $5 billion. DAB lawmaker Horace Cheung suggested introducing a parental education and tuition subsidy for self-financing tertiary programs. He said he's confident LegCo will approve the additional funding before the summer recess in mid-July, as both sides of the bench have little disagreements on the proposals.
Certainly that will not be a final solution for all the problems in the education, but we hope that it will be a good start of the chief executive and showed her determination in resolving the problems in the education sector.
The League of Social Democrats marched the streets today accusing the chief executive of interfering with a legislative council investigation. Carrying banners, around 20 protesters made their way to Government House. They criticised the CE for secretly amending documents on the proposed scope of investigation and accused Leung of colluding with pro-establishment legislator Holden Chow to mislead the probe. Meanwhile, CY Leung has repeated calls for on his blog, for accountancy sector lawmaker Kenneth Leung to quit the investigation. It's the 4th consecutive day that he's taken to the internet to voice his stance. And moving away from Hong Kong, as controversies swell over in Washington, it was down to business for US President Donald Trump on his trip to the Saudi Arabian capital of Riyadh. A record-breaking $110 billion arms deal was signed with the kingdom. Despite the lavish sword dancing ceremony and a civilian honour bestowed by King Salman, attention was all on the multi-billion-dollar arms agreement, the biggest made in US history. The deal commits the Gulf country looking to diversify its economy away from oil to purchasing all kinds of military equipment, from tanks and helicopters to radar and cyber security systems. Altogether, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the US signed trade agreements worth a whopping $350 billion.
Tremendous investments into the United States, and our military community is very happy, and we want to thank you and Saudi Arabia, but hundreds of billions of dollars of investments into the United States, and jobs, jobs, jobs.
Well, while he may be meeting with world leaders overseas this week, things aren't so rosy at home for President Donald Trump. There are signs he's facing growing isolation in Washington, with fellow Republicans in Congress distancing themselves from the president amid a string of scandals. Donald Trump's warm welcome in Saudi Arabia Saturday comes as the American president faces increasing isolation in Washington. Lawmakers from Trump's own Republican Party showing signs of going their own way in an effort to salvage what they can of a healthcare and tax reform agenda, amid signs that scandals embroiling the White House aren't likely to die down anytime soon. News reports Friday that investigators have identified a senior White House advisor as a person of interest in a probe into alleged collusion between Trump's campaign and Russian agents, further fueling concerns from Republicans in Congress that they will continue to be forced to defend the administration, distracting them from pursuing their legislative goals. Some have complained that a lack of communication from the White House has left GOP lawmakers frustrated. Republican Richard Burr of the Senate Intelligence Committee telling Reuters he could not get through to the administration after news broke that Trump had shared highly classified information with Russia's foreign minister. At the same time, White House aides telling Reuters they feel abandoned by Republicans on Capitol Hill amid the furor over the firing of FBI Director James Comey and allegations that Trump tried to influence the Bureau's probe into possible Russian links to the administration. The White House did not respond to requests for comment on this story. Trump is on a 10-day trip to the Middle East and Europe, his first foreign visit as president. Well, thousands of Houthi followers in Yemen took to the streets to protest against US President Donald Trump's visit to neighbouring Saudi Arabia. Demonstrators held Yemeni flags and banners as they marched across the country's capital, Sana'a, denouncing Israel and the US. This after a Saudi-backed Sunni Arab coalition said it had intercepted a rocket fired by Houthi rebels. The impoverished state has been embroiled in a near 2-year-old turmoil as the Gulf Arab coalition battles the Iran-allied Houthi movement.
We are here today to say no for terrorism, no for American terrorism. And we are here to say to Trump, you kill Yemenis with Saudi hands. You support Qaeda ISIS by supporting Saudi Wahhabi regime.
Iranians elected incumbent President Hassan Rouhani for a second time after a record turnout at the polls. The result, a bitter rejection to hardliner populism. Sasha O'Donoghue reports.
A clear rejection of populism in Iran. President Hassan Rouhani winning the presidential election, handing an emphatic defeat to his hardline rival, Ebrahim Raisi. The incumbent president, who first took power in 2013, won the election with 23.5 million votes to his rival's 15.8 million. Raisi had hoped to draw on economic discontent in the Islamic Republic to gain votes. Touted as the darling of conservative hawks, his populist approach appeared to put off potential voters. Instead, Rouhani's rejection of Iran's nuclear program in favor of strengthening ties with the West won votes among those who want a stable, non-violent country. During weeks of campaigning, the two main candidates exchanged accusations of corruption and brutality in unprecedentedly hostile television debates. Turnout at around 70%, with Rouhani winning 57% of the votes. For Iranians, the election presented a stark choice between competing visions of the country. Despite doubts about Rouhani, the prospect of victory by Raisi, who was one of 4 judges in the 1980s that approved the death sentences of thousands of political prisoners, was enough to drive concerned Iranians to vote for the current president in force. It was a contest between rural conservatives with economic grievances and urbanites looking for a progressive agenda, an election resembling recent battlegrounds in Europe and the United States. But it was the nationalist and not the populist camp that won over voters in the end.
Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State has called on Hassan Rouhani to end the country's ballistic missile program and end its network of terrorism. Speaking at a joint news conference with his Saudi counterpart in Riyadh, Rex Tillerson insists this has to be done if Iran wants to change its relationship with the rest of the world. He added the US intends to intensify its efforts to deter Tehran in Syria and Yemen, countries where Washington and Iran side with opposing forces. Coming up next, the latest from the world of business. Toshiba's chip business is still up for grabs, and according to people with knowledge of the matter, US buyout firm Bain Capital plans to bid around $13.5 billion for a majority stake in the lucrative unit. Ciara Lee reports.
The suitors are lining up as the second round deadline for Toshiba's chip business nears. Sources say US chip maker Broadcom, which has teamed up with private equity firm Silver Lake and US buyout firm Bain Capital, which has partnered South Korean chip maker SK Hynix, will bid. Private equity firm KKR is also thought to be in the running. Toshiba, which values its chip unit at least $18 billion, was forced to put its prized asset on the block this year. It suffered dramatic cost overruns at its now bankrupt US nuclear unit, leaving it scrambling for cash. Selling the chip unit is critical for the company's recovery.
Its ongoing future as a listed company on Tokyo equity indices is largely reflective on a shoring up of its balance sheet and dealing with these latent issues which obviously relate back to its Westinghouse holdings. So it is necessary that the company needs to facilitate asset sales in order to boost its balance sheet. So as we get to this second deadline in terms of the bidding process, it is clear that the company needs funds.
Bain plans to bid around 1.5 trillion yen or $13 billion for a majority stake, people familiar with the matter have said. The offer would allow Toshiba and the management of the memory chip business to own a sizable holding, but much of the sale and its outcome